David, are you there?
I am here. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Cool. Yep. I'm gonna need about 1 minute here. I'll be right back.
Okay.
And we'll get this thing going.
Sounds great. Again, if you have a question, be sure and raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you as quickly as we can.
So how goes it, Warren? You good? Having a good week?
Well, yesterday was a little stressful with the whole negotiation thing, but
yeah, I wondered how that went.
Today's better. I got to go back into the room one more time tomorrow, and then I think all the regulars will be back on Monday. So
got it.
I'm just a fill-in. It's been very interesting. You learn a lot about people in a room like that for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I bet.
Absolutely. How are you?
I'm well. I've had a little bit of a hectic morning here. I'm about 3 minutes behind, but let me get my environment going here, and we'll have a good discussion. We have an hour, right?
We do have an hour, and
cool.
I think you have a list of questions already, so we should be hitting those as we go through here. And this is a topic that I basically don't know a whole lot about, but I'm sure you know a ton about.
Yeah, it's a matter of, I think it's a matter of changing some of the words that we use to describe certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you give things certain labels and you talk about data and objects and programming and all that kind of stuff, I think it tends to confuse people. So we can maybe put some new labels on things and try to get it to make a little bit of sense. So let me do this. So what I'm going to do here is...
See, I need to let you.
Yeah, let me get a couple things downloaded here, and we'll let a couple more people get into our meeting, and I'll be about a minute.
Okay.
And trying to get my environment set up so that you guys don't have to see me, downloading and changing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff that is just not related to this discussion. But I made a couple of assets that I wanted to use as little props for us to understand what it is that we're trying to do. And I'm going to get a little application running here. So let me close this. And we'll get something fun running. A lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about today is going to be pretty advanced. But I think that the folks in the meeting will get a little bit out of it that'll help it'll make some sense.
Well, looking at the names that are online, I think they're all people that have asked questions related to this.
Yeah, totally. And I don't have that list of questions in front of me. I'll dig them up while we get going. But let me get in here and I'll share my screen. And we'll start this off. Let me find the screen share button.
Have you got it?
Where is that thing? It's like we got 11 people, which is good.
There you go. If you don't have it, you've got it now.
Looks like I found it. So can you see my screen?
I certainly can.
Okay, cool. So should we get us going then?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about JSON data and how we can use that JSON data inside our plugins or really inside our application. And so we're going to be covering some topics. Let me find our PDF that we had up earlier, our agenda. I'm a little bit unorganized right now, but that's completely okay. So we'll find our little agenda and we'll go through the bullet points there and we'll try to make some sense out of all this stuff. And I think a lot of you will understand what JSON is, why we use it, what these individual items are and everything, but let's talk about these real fast. And I'm going to, as usual, we only have an hour because it's the lunchtime webinar, but we'll get as much in as we possibly can. And so why do we use JSON data? Why use it in the first place? And so when we talk about these applications, when we talk about Buzztouch applications, we all know that this configuration data file is a representation of this information in our control panel. So when we look at our control panel and we manipulate all of the different screens and the properties for our application, we save it in a format called JSON data. So we talked in the couple of the previous webinars about why that is, and what it stands for. JavaScript object notation is technically what it stands for, but really the answer to why we use JSON data is it's very, very portable. That's the best reason. So I can take this configuration file, for example, I can copy all of this and I can make a new text file, and it's just a portable, simple way to describe information in a lot of detail. It's highly detailed, highly organized, and it's really lightweight. So we can move it around and we can do all kinds of interesting things with it. We can put that text file on a web server, we can add it to our project, we can do all kinds of things. So we use JSON data because of its portability and its flexibility. So we could do a whole discussion about comparing JSON data with maybe a spreadsheet file or an XML file, or heck, we could keep all of this stuff in a little database in our project. But we decided a long time ago that representing all of the settings and all of the properties inside of our project in one file would make it easier for everybody. And so that's what we do. So again, we could have a long discussion about all the different formats and everything, but fundamentally it's just a way to store rules for our apps. So in that JSON file, we have individual items, and we call those Buzztouch items. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger if I can. See if I can go preferences, font. Let's see here. Font size maybe? Nah, I think you guys can probably just read it the way it is. I don't know the shortcut to the font editor in Xcode off the top of my head. So we have a configuration root node, we call that. So we have BT app config, so everything inside this curly brace and this curly brace at the end represents this configuration data. I can't quite scroll down there, but it's at the very end there. And inside of that we have a list of items, and we know it's a list because it starts with this square bracket. A square bracket in JSON means that everything inside the square bracket is going to be a list of things. So that square bracket ends right here, down at the end, right there. And then inside the items, we have individual things, and we only have one of them in this case, and the item type of this thing is called a BT app, or a Buzztouch application. So everything from here to here is one Buzztouch application. So in theory, and we're not going to do this today, but in theory, because this is a list, and because it starts with an opening bracket and ends with a closing bracket, we could put a comma after this thing, and this thing, item type, this thing is a Buzztouch app. We could copy this whole thing. Because we put a comma after it, we could give ourselves some space, and we could paste it in here. Now we have now we have two things, two applications in one list, which is kind of interesting, and it goes way beyond what we're trying to do. But in terms of how the data is organized and represented, there isn't any limits as to what you can do with it. So our configuration files come with one application in the list, because that's all we use. And we know this item thing here has a unique ID. Because it's an application, this represents the ID of the app in your control panel. It has individual properties. It's got the API key and the Buzztouch app ID and a data URL. You can see I've got some 9s in here because I was experimenting. It's got a data URL, it's got a name, and then it's got another list of things. We call it a list of themes. So we know it's a list because we have an opening bracket and a closing bracket. We have a list of themes, and then we have a list of tabs. And this particular application has 0 tabs, but the list still exists. And the list exists because we have the bracket. And then we have a long list of screens. And most of us are familiar with what screens represent. Of course, each one of these screens, there's a screen, there's a screen, there's a screen. has individual properties. Some of them have what we call child items. You can see that here. But these child items are part of this screen. Then there's this screen, and then there's this screen. So each thing in our list is followed by a comma. You can see there's a comma there after the closing bracket. And in essence, we have well-structured information that becomes kind of easy to decipher if you spend a little bit of time and try to understand how this works. So when we compile our application, we read all of this data into memory, into the phone's memory. And when we do that is when the application first launches. So this is important to understand because for this application to work and for these buttons to go places, and I could tell you about this beach cleanup app that I worked on the other day, but last Saturday I was invited to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is a big fancy aquarium here in town, to speak at their Conservation and Technology Summit. And I made an app in front of everybody. We made this app in about 10 minutes, and that was kind of fun. But this is our beach cleanup app. But anyway, so in our applications delegate file, when it launches, we read all of this configuration data into memory. And we do that with a method called load data. Load app data. So the load app data method does all kinds of stuff here, like it tries to figure out where the data is. Is it on the device? Is it on a web server? Blah, blah, blah. And eventually, once it finds that data, it goes through it and it remembers it into memory. And we call that parsing the configuration data. So our application now, this phone right here, is holding this text data in memory. And I say in memory, I need to touch on that a little bit. That's a little bit different than, say, saving it to a file system or saving it to a database or something like that. We read it into memory so that we can access values inside of it very, very quickly. And so for those of you who've done a little bit of programming, you'll understand the significance of that. But when you load all this up into memory, we can ask it questions and we can say, hey, go get me this screen, or go get me that theme, or go get me the app name, or something like that, very, very quickly, because we don't have to parse it. We don't have to read through this every single time. And so it makes it quite a bit faster to access. So we put it into memory. And it's not that, quote, heavy. It's just text data, so it doesn't, eat the battery or kill the phone or anything like that. Some of these configuration files are very, very long. But we want to talk about how do we take advantage of this stuff inside of a plugin. So let's make a quick plugin. I'll add a class file here. We'll just do it right here just to make a new group so it's easy to see. We'll call this my plugin. This won't take long, but it is important that we demonstrate how to do it. And I'm not using the plugin creator tool. I'm just going to make a couple new class files. So we're going to do Cocoa Touch Objective-C class. We'll call this my cool plugin. And we're going to subclass the UI view controller. And we're going to change that here in a second. We'll also ask it to make us an interface builder file, because we're going to add some things to the interface. And we'll put this just in the root of our project. And now we have 3 files. We've got a generic view controller. We've got the .h, the interface file, and then we've got the implementation file, and then we've got the XIB file. So screens and plugins in Buzztouch apps, remember all these screens and plugins that we use, they don't extend the generic view controller class. They extend the Buzztouch view controller class. So I'm going to copy this and extend this class instead of the generic view controller class so that we can get some methods. And you notice the little red warning there? This source code file doesn't even know what that is because we have not imported it yet. So we're going to import all the standard imports that all these plugins use. We'll just copy these. We'll import all of these. And if you use the plugin creator tool, you don't have to do any of this stuff, but we're doing the same thing. And you see these little curly braces here? They're not required in Objective-C classes. Just kind of depends on how you're going to use them. But I like to use them anyway. I mean, it depends on how you're going to use this class, but I like to get everything standard. And then our .m file, we'll do the same thing. We'll take the contents of this blank plugin, I'll just copy it all. I'll copy all this text and put it in here. Of course, my name's wrong now because this is not the Buzztouch screen blank class file. This is the my cool plugin class file. And we need to import that .h file. So here's our blank plugin. So it doesn't do anything yet, but I wanted to demonstrate that we're going to load this up as our home screen so we can begin to explore how JSON data is used in the plugins. So that takes us back to our agenda. We talked a little bit about why we're using JSON, what the individual items were, and we haven't really talked about how they're represented in memory in terms of a BT item, but we'll get to that. Talked a little bit about lists of items, and we talked a little bit about how we read the data from the config file into memory. We didn't do any nuts and bolts syntax or code or anything, but we just kind of stepped through. And now eventually we need to get it from memory into the user interface. So we're going to explore a little bit of this. And so this isn't as hard as some people think, but it can get confusing. I'm just deleting that copyright information so that we can focus on the code. So when our view controller loads, it's going to load up and it's going to set the background for the navigation bar and the title. So let's go to our config data, and in our screens array, let's make a new object. So we'll give it an item ID that needs to be unique. We'll just randomize it. We'll give it an item type, because every item has an item ID and an item type. Item ID, item type. So everything needs an item ID that's unique, an item type, and since this is a screen, the item type is going to match the type of screen we want to load. And this is my cool plugin up here. That's the one we just made. And that's all we're going to give it. And I'm going to put a comma after this because there's more screens in our list here. And when we run this app, because this is the first screen in the list of screens, it's going to become our home screen. So let's launch this. And unless I've got something cached here, I might have to reset the simulator. Let me make sure. Yeah, no, we're good. So here's our blank home screen. This is an instance of my cool plugin with nothing in it. And the reason that it loaded first is because it's the first screen in our list. You saw that little beach hut? That's because our theme is using a splash screen. So let's get rid of the splash screen so our theme does not use the little, so that we don't have to look at that splash screen every time we launch. And let's add some properties to this plugin. So we already have a nib file. Interface Builder was nice enough to build us a nib file. So let's make sure that the file's owner for the Interface Builder file is the class that we want it to be, which is my cool plugin. So the owner is this class, which is good. So it has a view, and the view is blank, and you see it has a white background. And so let's manipulate this view a little bit, and let's make sure that the background color is clear, so that if our application in the theme has a background color, it'll show through. Let's add a button to it, and we'll say my button. So if I run this now, if I run this application now, what you're going to see is the home screen. Oh, we got a crash. Code red. Something died. Let's see what we did. I'm just trying to get this going so we can connect some JSON to it. Files owner, my cool plugin. Do we have a connection? We got the view. Let's reconnect that view. Don't need to connect the button yet. That shouldn't have crashed like that, but let's figure out what's going on. You gotta love the immediate crashes right in front of everybody, right? Live crashes so that we can debug them. I don't know what's going on. My cool plugin could not instantiate class name SO layout constraints. This is a good lesson. When you make nib files, I asked Interface Builder to do this for me, but when I normally do it manually. When you make nib files, you do not want to use, at least today, this idea of auto layout. You want to make sure you turn off auto layout, and that's basically for another lesson, but it causes issues with when you're compiling against older devices and older targets and all that kind of stuff. I'm compiling and targeting older older phones that doesn't even recognize what auto layout is, so I've forgotten to uncheck that. So anyway, so here's our view. We've got a button that doesn't do anything. This button is not connected to our code. We don't have a title bar. I mean, we don't have a title in our navigation bar. We have a refresh button because it's our home screen. I'm going to manipulate some JSON now, and we'll begin to play with this. So if I want to add nav bar title text, I can say my cool plugin. And we're not going to write any code. We're just adding this property to this JSON data for this screen. I'm going to take away the data URL for the app so we don't see the refresh button. And I'm going to relaunch this. And what we're going to get is a title bar. The refresh button is gone because we don't have a data URL. And the button still doesn't do anything. But I'm demonstrating, we just demonstrated how adding a simple property to our JSON is now transferred to the UI, but we didn't actually do that. So how does that work? I see the little icon bouncing here. We'll stop for some questions here in just a sec. I want to get through this section. So the reason that the title is showing up in the nav bar is because in our view will appear method, which runs every time this view is about to appear, we said, hey, Buzztouch View Utilities, go ahead and configure the background and the navigation bar with this screen's data. So this comes to our first important point of our agenda. What the heck is this screen's data, and what is this BT item thing? So individual items throughout your Buzztouch project are represented by an object called a Buzztouch item. And it's just a simple class file, and in programming speak I say simple, but it's just a class file, an Objective-C object that represents, here it is right here, there's a .h and a .m, that represents lots of things in our project. So the cool thing about these Buzztouch items is we can represent just about anything with this one object. We can represent the entire app, we can represent one screen, we can represent a button, we can represent a menu item, we can represent, you know, something you come up with, a car, a person, a desk, a computer, anything. And the way that we can represent anything is we can pass around JSON data like this. So this item looks like that, and it's only got 3 properties, an ID, a type, and a nav bar. Well, nav bar title text. But some of these other ones have lots of properties. So we can add properties to our item, like button text, for example, click me, pretty easily. But we have not made a connection between, excuse me, this button text and the actual button, and that's what we're about to do. But revisiting this Buzztouch item concept, if you looked at, let me find a picture here. If you looked at a Buzztouch item in a picture, it would look something like this. The item type or the object type is Buzztouch item. Every Buzztouch item will have an ID, a type, and then a long list of variables. We call them JSON variables or JSON vars. So in this example image on the screen, I've given this item ID 1234. Doesn't matter what it is as long as it's unique across everything. I've given it an item type of my cool thing, could be anything, and I've given it these JSON variables. If I had a list of these items in my app, in the JSON data, like we have a list of child items, for example, for a menu, each one of these things is going to be one of these in a list. So we have the first one, the second one, which is actually 0, 1, 2, 3. So looking at this visually might help some of you understand when you're dealing with lists of items, how can I access, say, the third story in my list of blog entries or the first person in my list of people. So if you were going to make a person or represent a person, your item ID would just be a unique ID for that person. Your item type might be something like my person. And then the JSON data would be the item ID, the item type, and then after that you might have first name, last name, address, city, street, phone, or whatever, because your item is representing a person. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to ask for 1 or 2 questions because we will run out of time. Warren, do you see any questions posted yet? I don't see anything in the chat window. Oh, here we go. Can you show us how to add the iPad specific XIB again? And how Xcode knows which one to use? Sure. That's a little off topic, but it'll just take a sec. So the question from A-Train was, how do I make an iPad version of this? So I'll do it real fast. I'm going to hit New File. I'm guessing this will be recorded, so you can refer back to this in a minute. New File, User Interface. I always do empty, but I could do it differently. Device Family, iPad. I'm going to name it the exact same thing as our last one. And I'm going to put a tilde iPad after the name. So here it is. There's the phone version and there's the iPad version. I did a blank one so it doesn't have a view. So we need to, oops, I didn't want the organizer. We need to add a view to this. So let me search for UI view. Here's a view. We'll add a view. Okay, so now we have a view. We're going to connect the class file for our owner to myCoolPlugin. We got to tell myCoolPlugin which view it's his. You know, what view do I use? That's the view. We need to make sure we uncheck that auto layout stuff. We had a button on our other view, so let's add a button to this view. So there's our button. What did we type on the button? My button. We're going to change that with JSON here in a minute. So my button. Here we go. We got an extra view there. Yeah, so let's run this on an iPad and make sure that that did it. And then we'll get back to the bouncing question list. iPad, does anybody share this with me? The iPad simulator seems to take longer to launch, which is crazy. Oh, I got to reset this. Let me reset the simulator. I've got an old version of an app on there. And then Susan's got a great question. Okay, so let's run this again to get back to A-Trains. We're demonstrating that we can connect our iPad interface. Yeah, so here's our iPad interface file with my button. And hopefully you saw how that worked. To recap the steps, I created a new class file, a new interface builder file with the tilde iPad extension. I connected the files owner to our files owner right here, myCoolPlugin, to our class that's going to control it, our code that's going to control it. Then I added a view and I made the connection to the view. So now let's work about this button, because Susan brings up a great question. Susan's saying, how come, let me read it again so I have her question word for word. I think I know the answer to this, but why did the navbar text work without code, but the button text needs code to work? It's a great question. Maybe I'll demonstrate it this way. The navbar would not have worked if we didn't have this magic here in the Buzztouch View utilities. So if we commented all this out, check this out. This might help Susan answer. In our viewDidLoad method, if we didn't do this, the navbar wouldn't do anything. And I'll show you here. Let's run it on the iPhone because it launches faster. Where'd it go? It's gone. There it is. See, the navbar is blank. We could do something like manually, we could say get the navbar title text property from the JSON, set the title of the navbar to that. But why would we go through all of that when we can just use the built-in Buzztouch View utility method? And we're going to get to some of those helper methods in a minute. So instead of writing a bunch of code, we said, hey, Buzztouch View utilities, fire this method and use this data, self.screenData, which we have not got to yet. That's a representation of this. And it already knows to look for a navbar title text. So we're going to write some code and do some custom stuff and manipulate our button text. So, but before we do that, we're getting ahead of ourselves. What is this self.screenData? I hear this all the time. What is self.screenData and where is that represented? because it's not in our class file. We didn't make an object, we didn't make a variable like a Buzztouch item, self dot, screen data. Buzztouch item's not imported, so it might error, yeah. We didn't do that. So where does this screen data come from? Well, because we subclassed the Buzztouch view controller, it's coming from there. Everything that subclasses the Buzztouch view controller has all these built-in properties. So one of them is called screen data, and it is a Buzztouch item. And so because it's a Buzztouch item, we know that it will have properties like item ID, like item type, and the JSON data. So every one of your screens, when you subclass the Buzztouch view controller, or we call that making it a plugin, has access to that self.screen data. So here's another way to do it. What if we just use the debugger just for fun, and we say it's got a method called showIt, I think. Oh, here, I'll just use this one. I'll just copy this. Let's use the debugger and say, let's print the value of this screen's data. Let's say, hey, self.screen data item ID, right? Let's print that right to the output window when this launches. Just to prove that the data has, oh, I got a syntax error. Just to prove that the data has an ID or an item type, right? So the item ID for this plugin, we already know is 2323223. And when it launched, down here in our output window, we just printed 2323233 because we used self.screen data item ID. So we're getting a little off track here, but I want you guys to know that this item right here holds the data from our configuration file. So let's get back to how do we use that data. That's what the whole point of this this webinar is. How do I get the button text? So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. And the fastest way is to do it like all the other plugins do it and use a built-in method that we can take advantage of our strings class. And I'll use one here that I'll just copy this from one of these other files and then explain it. So let's get, we want to get the text for the button. And we want to get the text for the button and put it on the button itself. So before we do that, we got to make a connection to the button. Well, know what? Let's go backwards. Let's do it just for fun here. View will appear. Let's do it in the view did load. Get button text. So how do we get that button text? Well, one way to do it is use this built-in method called Buzztouch strings get JSON property value. And this method is going to take two arguments. It's going to take, or I'm sorry, three arguments. It's going to take the JSON data itself, the name of the, do we call it button text? The name of the property you want, yeah, we want button text. And what you want to return if button text, no button text provided, or none. This is the default value. So this is a method call that we can use all over our code. We can say, hey, I want to get the value of the button text from this piece of JSON data. So what do we want to do with that? So we want to make for now, let's just log it to let's just make a string out of it. My button text equals, let's just make a string out of it and print that to the log so that we can prove to ourselves that it's working. So we'll get my button text and we'll print it right here. And we'll run this thing just to show us that indeed we are returning my button text. If you look right here, so this is the view did load method for this plugin. Let's find it. Click me. So there's our button text right there. We just used the debugger to print it to the output console, but we're going to apply that to our button. But what if the button text didn't exist? What if this wasn't in our JSON? Or what if you had a typo? like you went button texted or something like that. In this case, this value, this variable here, my button text, is going to hold the value of the default that we passed into this method because it doesn't exist. And that can be really, really useful. And so if you look here, our button text now is going to be none because I provided a default value of none. Let me find it. None right there. So config, where's our typo? Here it is, button text. See, we're going to run out of time here, but we got to do a couple of things. So I need to make a IB outlet, which is a UI button. We'll call it my button. What am I doing here? I have IB outlet. I had a typo. Declare the property for it. Property non-atomic retain IB outlet of type UI button. Called it my button. Another typo somewhere. We'll also make an IB action while we're here. IB action. Click me. We'll send in the button. Okay, so my button needs to be synthesized because it's a property, so we need to synthesize it. My button. We need to get rid of it when we deallocate the memory for this screen, so we release this memory. We do this with every property we make, but we're just trying to kind of do some setup. And then we made an IB action that we're going to connect to that button. So this is the click me action. And when the button gets clicked, we're going to say click me. Clicked. Okay, so that was a little homework to set this button up. Button, we need to connect it to something. So the file's owner now knows that we have a button. You see this button right here? That's because we declared it as an IB outlet. So that button, we're going to connect the owner to the button. And then the button itself, when it gets clicked, touch up inside, we're going to run our method, our IB action called click me. And we're just going to prove that we've indeed established that connection from the interface builder class, interface builder file to the actual source code. So now we can begin to manipulate the button. So click, 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 click. That works. So now we have a connection to that button or a reference. So we can set the text of that button. We can set the background image of that button. We can do anything we want to do with that button. We can say my button set. What are we setting, right? Just type in set. We can set the tag, text color, title color. We're going to set the title, and it's going to ask for a string for the title, and then it's going to ask for a user interface control state, which also confuses people. But this method takes two arguments, a title and a control state. So we're going to set the title to my button text that we established right there, and then we're going to say for state UI control state normal. And now we have connected our button to our JSON. So we took the data from the file into memory when we loaded the screen. We did that automatically because we're still working with self.screen data. And then we took it from memory to the UI in a very, very, very simple way. So when we launch this, the button text is going to say, click me, or should we put dynamic text so that we know that this is working? So dynamic text, right? So we attached the value of this JSON data to the button. Now we could have easily said, we don't need a whole new variable for that. Let's just do this all in one call. Right? Set title. Here's the title, which is go get it, run this big method for state, UI control state normal, and that would do the same thing. So let's take one question. We're running out of time. I'm going to look at the question list, and then we got to get to this idea of lists. And yeah, Warren, I don't mind extending this. We go, in other words, 15 minutes more is fine by me. I don't see any other questions in the list, so I can just keep rocking and rolling.
Just
okay,
keep
cool.
going.
Yep, I'll just keep going. So we just demonstrated some very, very basic stuff. How to get the JSON data, an arbitrary property that we decided. Because remember, when you're making plugins, you might say something like this. Click button load screen. What the heck does that mean? Maybe you want to load a screen. I don't know, maybe you want to send an email, so we'll use this send email screen, which has this item ID. Maybe your plugin does something interesting with this property. Click button load screen, and that's just completely arbitrary. You could have called it, you know, my click screen, whatever. Let's call it my click screen. And you know, because you're the plugin developer, what this data represents. And that happens to be an ID, so you might hint yourself by saying my click screen ID. Or maybe you want to do, you know, my click screen nickname. You know, and instead of using IDs, you might want to use pass in a nickname. So let's pull this value out of this JSON when the button is clicked, just for fun. So when the button is clicked, right here in the click me method, we want to get the value of that from our JSON. So I just pasted it as a hint. And we're going to use the same method we always use. We're going to use this get JSON property value from the screen's data. So this is a string. Do the same thing we did. Click load screen name or something. Load screen nickname. We can name this ever we want. Equals. Get the JSON property value for this property. And if it doesn't exist, I don't want anything back, because if it doesn't exist, you know, we're not going to just randomly load a screen or whatever. So we might say, if this has a length that's more than 0, then we must have found it, right? Load that screen. So let's log the value of that to prove to ourselves that we found what we needed. So let's run this and click the button. And we wanted to know, the question was, we wanted to pull out of our data the value of my click screen nickname. And we know that my click screen nickname is beach map. I'm going to clear this, make it a little bigger so we can all see. I'm going to hit the dynamic text button. And we're now successfully accessing beach map. So if we want to get really crazy, let's do something with beach map. I see somebody's asking a question. I'll bet you without even looking. It's how do I load the beach map screen? Oh no, that's Warren posting a message. So let's do that. Let's load the beach map screen. So we got to make a Buzztouch item, right? Buzztouch item, my next screen. This is going to represent the data for the next screen. Equals, and we can use, I think we can use the application class. So I need a reference to the apps delegate. I'll just copy this. We need to create some, create a screen object, but I don't want to write all kinds of code to search through this whole thing to find the screen with the nickname, you know, beach screen or beach map. I'll just use some built-in methods to do that. And so we'll say, let's make a new item. We'll call it my next screen. We'll say app delegate, root app, get screen data by item nickname, by nickname. We're going to pass in the nickname. And we're not going to just type in beach data, although we could. Beach data. We could totally do that. But this was a dynamic value, right? Because we pulled it from this button. So instead of just typing in beach data, well, let's prove it. Let's do it both ways. So this would be like a hard-coded one. So my next screen is what we want to load. So let's use the Buzztouch view utility, or the Buzztouch view controller manager. And let's load that baby. So Buzztouch view controller. what is it, load screen, handle right tap? I can't remember what it's called. Handle tap to load screen. Let's find it. I always forget. View controller. Yeah, here we go. Handle tap to load screen. Let me copy this so I have it in front of me so I don't make a typo. So handle tap to load screen takes 3 arguments. It takes a Buzztouch item that represents the parent screen data. That's this screen. It takes a Buzztouch item to represent a menu item, like a menu item or a button, which we don't have, so we're going to ignore that. And then it takes a Buzztouch item to represent the screen that we're going to load. So Buzztouch view controller, handle tap to load screen, we'll pass in self.screen data. We'll pass in nil for the menu row or whatever, and then we'll pass in my next screen. Because this, my next screen, is a Buzztouch item. And remember, this thing wants 3 things. It wants a Buzztouch item here to represent the parent screen data, so that's self or my cool plugins data. It wants a Buzztouch item for the menu object or the row or whatever. We just said nil because we're not using that. And then my next screen, we're going to put right there, right? Because we just created this. Let me give a little space here. We just created this. Why is this yelling at me? I got some syntax here going on. Oh, I got a typo. Buzztouch view controller. There we go. And so there's lots and lots of, it's still got a warning here. What's yelling at me now? Did I import Buzztouch view controller? View control manager? Yeah. Oh, it's the view control manager. What did I use? Yeah, Buzztouch view controller is different than the Buzztouch view control manager. So anyway, so we hand typed in the name of the nickname of the screen we want to load just to demonstrate this, but we wanted to actually pull it from the JSON data. Does that make sense? So beach map is the nickname, and it can't find the view controller, so I might have, oh, beach data doesn't exist. We wanted beach map. Yeah, there's our beach map. Okay, so this is not going to be hand typed in though. We wanted to use the load screen nickname. Get all this out of here. Give ourselves some good notes. Create an instance of a BT item to represent the screen to load. Use built-in method to load screen. Okay, so that's how we, just to recap here, we got the load screen nickname from the data for our screen. If we found it, if it had a length more than 0, then we got a reference to our application delegate file so that we could use properties of it. And then we said, hey, app delegate, you have a root app. Use your built-in method called get screen data by nickname. There's the nickname. And then we told the view controller to run a method called handle tap to load screen and passed it the 3 things it wanted, one of which we just gave it nothing, but that's allowed, and the next screen. So that's kind of cool. So I think most of us in this webinar, that could be a webinar right in itself, right? Getting simple values from our configuration data, just like that. But what if you have a list of items? What if you have a list of items that you're going to use, like pages in a storybook or blog posts, or maybe you have a plugin that shows the students in a classroom? Well, you would probably have a classroom screen, and then the child items might be students. So let's do that. Let's represent some students. So in our screens data, we need to represent some students. So I have a few options. I could just call them students. And then since it's an array of students, I put the little square brackets. You guys are all used to things. I always call them child items because it's just a global term that I can use for a generic term that I can use to represent anything. But sometimes it gets hard to explain. So we'll just call them students. So let's make a list of students. And we know that they're going to be Buzztouch items, right? Because everything's a Buzztouch item. I know that sounds crazy, but Why not, right? We don't need to make a whole new student class, so we'll give them an item ID, whatever. We'll give them an item type. This is just completely arbitrary. I'm going to say student, and then we'll give it a first name, Joe, and a last name, Smith. So that's a student. We'll put a comma after it. Make sure I don't have any typos here. It doesn't look like I do. We'll make 3 students. I don't know, 5 students. We'll go 99991. These don't matter. They just need to be unique. So they're all students, but we have Joe, Tom, Sally, and Billy. So Smith, Thompson, Tom Thompson. That sounds kind of funny. How about Book and Evans? We don't want a comma after the last student. And now this screen's data still has its standard properties. Still going to load beach map, but it also has a list of students. Or maybe this is, a list of beaches. Probably be more appropriate for this example. But let's just prove to ourselves that we haven't broken anything. And it looks like we have. So oh, here we go. Looks like I've got typo here. You notice, in fact, let me run that again and show you this. This is kind of handy. If you make a syntax error, it'll oftentimes show you, which is kind of cool. It doesn't necessarily show you where your error is. And let's jump online and make sure. I'll show you another trick. You might have seen this before. It's the JSON, I think it's called JSON lint. It's a cool little validator, but I might have a quote or a comma or something missing in this. So if I go to JSON lint, I think it's called. Yeah, you can just search like JSON validator. This is a really handy tool. I use it all the time. Yeah, so it's telling me I have a comma. It's telling me I have an error right there. I would have found that eventually. Look, it's on every one of them. But it takes forever when the files get big, right? So that's a really nice shortcut. Okay, so this still works just like we wanted. We're not doing anything with our students. So let's do something with the students. So this takes us back to this challenge. How do we take data from the text file into memory when we have a list of things? A list of things. One thing that we could do is not worry about it and just kind of take the old-fashioned way. Here's the click me method. And let's say in our click me method, we want to show an alert with the student's name. Right, so how would we get the student's name out of one of those things? Well, we've got to do a few things that might not seem readily obvious, but we'll draw on some other plugins that use lists, and I'll show you. See, something's bouncing here. Let's look at that. A-Train, as long as you're on screen transitions, do you think it's possible to load BT screens from URLs if you're using a custom URL scheme in an app? Yeah, that's going to have to be a future thing. A-Train, yeah, anything's possible, but we only have about 14 more minutes, so I want to make sure and get to this list stuff. So, okay, so I'm just going to go to the menu list simple because I know that it deals with lists, and I'm going to look at its load data. And again, I'm just drawing on, past stuff. And so, okay. So how do we get a list of things out of our JSON data to use in our code? I'm just going to paste this right here, and I'm going to fix it up a little bit. So it's right, and I'm going to comment this out while we change it a little bit around to take advantage of our students. So let's make a new array. Let's call it students. So actually let's make it a mutable array so we can add things to it and remove things to it. An array and a mutable array are the same thing, except NS array objects, you can't add and remove objects to them. So a list of students. Now we want to fill it up with, we want to take the data from the text file into memory so that later on somewhere down in our code we could use it. We don't want to do that over and over and over again. We could just try to read this right now and say, go find student with ID 93 or 92, but it tends to get a little bit slow. So you want to do this all at once, slow in computer terms. You want to read it into memory so that it's fast. And you would normally not do that in the click me method. You would probably do it like when the screen loaded. You would declare an array that you held on to in your .h. And then just like all the other screens do, and then when you click me, you would say, you know, go get student at position 6. But we're just going to do this on the click for now because we don't have a lot of time. So students. So how do we fill up an array of students from the memory? So I like to do a little temporary array. So we'll call this temp students that I'm going to get rid of when I'm done processing this logic. And there's a few kind of programming best practices, and usually it's best in Objective-C to not hold on to stuff for longer than you need it. So I'm going to build a little temporary array of students. And I'm saying, hey, the screen data, its JSON variables hold a list of students. I know that because I'm the plugin developer. And I know it's an array because I use these square brackets. So my students are going to equal the screen data object for key students. So that array right now, temporary students, equals the list of students. I think I could probably do this. Let's see here. Yeah, see, that's not going to work because this method, object for key, doesn't return a mutable array. It returns a regular array. So that's why we're going to do temp students. Okay, so we're going to ignore our regular students. We got a temporary array in memory represented here. So in Objective-C, a dictionary is very similar to an array in that you can loop through it and look through its contents. So for every item in the temporary student list, I want to do something. Okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to tell the code that this student is a Buzztouch item. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that yet. I don't want to confuse everybody. Let's give everyone some space here. Comment this students array out so we stop getting our warning for now. Let's just print to the log the first name of all the students. So while we do our for loop for each student in this dictionary, this list of students, we want to show the first name. And I could do nslog, but I'm just using the debugger. So let's see how I put here temp menu item. That's probably misleading. Let's call it temp student or each student. So for each student, we want to get object for key, first name, and print it to the screen. And we're going to do that when we click the button. So that way we can, I did it this way so we could easily see the output console. So when we click it here, oh, I didn't want to load another screen. Where's our student list? Yeah, so clicked Joe, Tom, Sally, Billy. Let me comment this out so we don't load another screen and do that again. It'll be easier to see. Okay, so I'm clearing the console so nothing's on it. I'm going to click this button and you're going to see the student names here. But we didn't do anything with those names, so we can't use them later. So let's make a Buzztouch item out of each student. We'll just call this temp student. Oh, I'm sorry, this student. I can't use temp student because I already did that right here. Equals. Let's allocate some memory for the Buzztouch item. And then initialize it. That thing's empty right now. Okay? But what we can do is we can set its ID, its item type, and its JSON variable data to the same values as in our config file. So we're moving the data from the text into memory so that we can later manipulate it. So let's do it this way. I'm just copying and pasting. So I'm going to say this student see if we can make sense out of this line by line. Okay, I just copied and changed the names of this stuff. We instantiate an array called students. It's mutable so we can add things to it. We created a temporary array out of the JSON data. We're looking at each item in that array. We're creating an object that's of the type Buzztouch item. We could make our own, Buzztouch student class if we wanted, but what's the point when we can use Buzztouch items? We've named it this student. We've allocated some memory for it. We applied the ID. We set the ID for this student to the same value as the ID in the JSON. We set the item type to the same value as the item type in the JSON. We set the JSON variables to the whole thing. And then we added add object here to our student list. So students, add object, actually that's not temp students, that's this student. And then when we're done with this student, so we're going to release the memory for it. So now our list of students has a number of things in it. So down here, list of students has 4 objects. So let's run this and make sure it doesn't break. And this is how we're transferring. Yeah, so we're good. So this is how we're transferring data. In fact, we're not going to load screens anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of this. This is how we're transferring data from the text file into memory. So that's how we load it up. But because we're doing this all within inside this click me method, we couldn't access this student's array in another method. So that's why you would instantiate a class property like this and do it globally in the class in most cases. But in this case, we're just experimenting. So let's get the third student from the list. So the third student is a Buzztouch item. We'll name this third student. And it equals students get object. I think we can get at index, get object. I can't remember. Is that right? No, I think it's get object at index. Without going to the documents, let's look at the menu one again and say, hey, how do we get the object out of there? Can't remember. Can't remember. Oh, object at index. Okay. So I was right. Instead of get object, it's object at index. So we're going to say the third student. And interestingly, remember, we don't want to forget that this is 0, 1, 2, 3. So this guy's name is Billy Evans. So we want a reference to the third student, and he's in our student list at the third position. So let's show an alert. Well, let's get his name, right? So remember our other method where we got the title. We're going to use this same exact method, get JSON property value, to get his first name. So this is a string. First name equals Buzztouch strings class, get the JSON property value, not for the screen's data, but for this student's data. The screen and this student are both Buzztouch items, so we can just switch those around. And we're going to get first name. And now we have the first name in memory. So let's show an alert. What did I do here? Oh, no default value. I want it to be blank if we don't have any default values. So self.showAlert, which is another built-in method, not an iOS built-in method, but a built-in method of the Buzztouch view controller that we extended. So because the Buzztouch view controller has a method that I wrote called showAlert, we can use it. ShowAlert takes a title and a message and then an integer for the tag. So we'll put student name as the title. We'll put first name as the message. And we're going to do this on the click. So let's run through this real fast and make sure we're cool. Student name is Billy. So if we wanted the fourth person or the second person and we wanted their last name, we could just do last name. And the name of the variable can be anything. I just like to name the variables the same thing as the JSON property, the JSON field names, the property names. So book, I said the second student, which is right here, the second student. Oh, I'm sorry, 0, 1, 2. So it's actually the third one in our list as humans, but it's the student at the index number 2, and we wanted his last name. So that's an example of how we can read data from the configuration file into memory and then do something with it. And we did all of that within the click me method, so we couldn't do that. We couldn't use this data anywhere else. So we have 5 more minutes, so I'm going to change it up just a little bit so we can use it in all kinds of other methods. So let's move our student property and make it a class or an instance variable. It's an array or an NS mutable array. It's not an IB outlet. It's called students. We're putting it in our class file so that we can use it anywhere in our code in any of the methods. Of course, we're responsible for maintaining its memory too. So we're going to synthesize it. We're going to get rid of it when the screen's done loading. When the screen releases its memory. We're going to get rid of the memory for that. And now we're going to see an error in the click me because we've already used we can't redeclare we can't reuse the name students. So instead of, and we didn't create it right here. We created it here, we didn't, describe it there. We described it in our class files. So instead of making a brand new one, we're just going to say self.students. So self refers to this whole class file. So self.students equals an array, fill it up. You don't have to use the word self, but it does make it a lot easier to keep track of, what you're doing. And so this way, when we do this, check this out. It's going to do the same thing, but we could have another method, some other method that doesn't have to read all this stuff. We could just do this. Third student equals self.students, because remember, self.students is already loaded up. We don't have to reread everything. We can say this is the first name. And so in the click me method, we're instantiating the array, we're reading it in, and then we can trigger the some other method. And I'm doing this just to prove that we can now access these students in all of our methods because we made them an instance variable instead of a local variable inside of this one method. So last thing we're going to do, because it's usually a bad idea to use button clicks when we load up our data. We usually want to load up our data in the view did load so that it only happens once. So we did the same thing. We created the array of students, we filled it all up, and now all of our other methods, it's available to us. So when we click this button, we'll do the first student, we'll show an alert. And when we do the, let's make 2 more buttons just to be fun. Click me 2. And we'll do this, we'll call this one, I don't know, the third student, and we'll do the first name. And instead of calling this third student, we'll call it the student. It's a little bit misleading. Okay, so click me 2 needs to be described in the .h. We need another button. Call this button 2. Remember, when we create instance variables, we need to make sure and synthesize them and release them. So we're going to synthesize button 2, which is an IB outlet. We're going to release it. We're going to go to our interface builder file. We're going to add another button. Button 2. We need to connect this button to the code. So button 2 is this one. touch up inside. We're going to do button 2 click or click me to. Let's prove this works. When we click the first one, we should get student name, the last name of the student in the first position, which is Thompson. And when we click the second one, which is this one, we should get the first name of the student in the third position. There we go. But button 2 is kind of generic, so we could real easily like button text. Maybe we want, and we can just put this anywhere, right? There's no really important order where these values go, as long as you adhere to the rule. Button 2 title. Button 2 is cool. Right, still valid JSON. It doesn't matter where it goes as long as you follow the rules. So button 2 title, we're going to apply that to our button. Here's where we set the button text for the first one. So set button text for second button. This is my button 2. We want button 2 title. Out of our JSON data using the built-in get JSON property field, get JSON property method. Button 2 is cool. So there you go. So that was a lot to digest, but there's really not a lot of code here. We did a lot of explaining and demonstrated a lot of stuff. Let's recap. We created 2 buttons. We created a list. We did these in the .h so that we could use them anywhere in our class file. We synthesized those 3 things in our .m and our implementation. We released them. We actually made another interface builder file, an iPad builder file. But when we clicked the button, when the screen first loaded, we accessed some data from our JSON and applied it to the button 1 and a button 2. We instantiated a new array. We filled, our students array, excuse me. We filled up that students array with the data from the JSON. Our view appeared. We set the nav bar and the title. And then our click me methods are just sitting here waiting for us to click. And every time you click, you don't have to read all the JSON every single time because we already did that and the view did load. So hopefully that was a help. Common helper methods, we didn't really get to this, but questions and answers, we really didn't get to that. I know my thing's bouncing, but have a look at the Buzztouch strings class file in the core. These files are super, super helpful, right? You can do all kinds of things in the strings class file. You can do, set preferences and get preferences and replace values and merge values and get JSON property value. And I wrote all this code, to save us time, and you guys can take advantage of it. And so that's the whole reason that we have so little code, really, to accomplish things that are generally really complicated. So I encourage you to look through there. Andy Kitts has a question. That's cool. The color is really important. Not sure what color he's referring to, but okay. Anybody else? Warren, you want to jump in and say something and close us up?
I'm
Sorry, can I ask a
back to
question,
myself.
David?
Back to myself.
Go ahead, Andy.
The color to the JSON I was talking about is there's a lot of frameworks I'm trying to integrate, but I'll only use UI color. So if I try and put the string in for the hex code, it won't work.
Got it.
Convert the hex code to the UI color.
Yeah, so watch. And I'm getting an echo. Maybe you guys can mute real fast. That's a great question. So the question is, if we wanted to change let's say the text color of my button 2, set text color. I think it's their set title color. It's going to take 2 arguments, the color and the state. You can't just pass in a name of a color because it wants a UI color. So you'd have to create a UI color, like red color, and then for state, UI control state normal, just like we always do. So this would be doing it manually. We're changing the title of the button's text to red. But how do we get that in the JSON data? Because we can't how do we represent a color in text, right? That's a great question. So maybe we want to do, and I'll show you how we do it everywhere. Button to text color I'll just do FFCC 66, which is some kind of weird orange, but this is just a web-safe hexadecimal value, and I applied it to a random name called button2textcolor. So how do we take that dynamic value and create a UI color out of it? Well, one way we could do that is create a UI color called myColor, and we could use the Buzztouch color class file, which is not imported yet. I wrote these helpers for this exact reason. So Buzztouch color has a method called getColor from hex string. So we want to pass in a string. This is just a hand-typed string, and this is now a color object. So we can apply that color object right there. And so instead of using red, we're using this web-safe color is only going to be converted into a UI color because we have a class to help us, the Buzztouch color class, which is kind of cool. Super useful. So there it is. We don't even need to create a new color out of it. We can just put this right here because we know that returns a color. That's representing the color object. Maybe we want it black. And let's take it a step further, and instead of doing it by hand, let's get the JSON value for button to title text color, and let's default it to black in case this is not provided. Button to title text color, and let's make it like a gray in the JSON to prove to ourselves that this is working. So this is a pretty long, so it's gray. That's a pretty long line of code because we're doing 4 different things. We're calling a method called setTitle. We're asking the Buzztouch color class to call a method called set or getColor from hex string. And we're passing it another value from the Buzztouch strings class, which is getPropertyValue. So it gets a little complicated, but you can see how ridiculously flexible this is. And keep in mind, we've done all of this with this one Buzztouch item thing. The way that I engineered the Buzztouch item object is specifically to allow you to represent anything you want. We represented a student in this case, but you could represent anything, a car, a song, an album, whatever you want. So hopefully that helped. That help you, Andy? You can unmute, I guess.
Yeah, that's fantastic. In fact, hold on that plugin now because it could be getting a bit better in a few minutes' time.
It could be what? It could be what?
It could be getting a bit more customizable in a few minutes' time.
Your plugin.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, I've got a couple things I got to do this afternoon that are pressing anyway. Warren, why don't you wrap us up?
Okay, Andy, if you could mute yourself again, thank you very much. David, as always, thank you so much for everything that you laid out for us here today. I know this is one of those webinars that people are going to watch over and over and over again to get all the nuances because there was quite a bit in there in that hour and 15 minutes. No webinar tomorrow before the Thanksgiving holiday, so we will take tomorrow off, but we'll try to get something set up for 2 webinars for next week. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. If you have any questions, go ahead and email those to me, or you can email them to David, or just post it on the forum and we'll get you answered. So with that, have a great day, everybody.
Okay, guys. Thanks, Warren. See you guys later.
See you.
Bye.